Sanctum Showdown has arrived, and by now we have a pretty good idea about what the optimal strategies are so you can get your astral projection for free. There are a couple of pieces of good news when it comes to astral projection. The first is that it seems to be very attainable. This is going to be a card you can get free to play just by playing the game mode and having a even kind of mediocre win rate. You should still be able to do it thanks to the charms that you get from leveling up. In addition to that, there are a couple of bugs that may happen to you that may benefit you heavily. Sometimes when people level up, they get the charms that they got from the level up applied to their reward track. It's actually crazy. There's no guarantee this will happen to you, but if it does, it is a big boost for basically nothing. What this has done is meant that people are getting this card in about 3 to 5 hours of actual gameplay of Sanctum Showdown, which means that this is a very attainable goal. Now, unlike previous Sanctum Showdowns, this is the only card you're actually going to get. You aren't going to be able to farm up for Series 4 and 5 cards, and that is a meaningful downgrade to the Sanctum Showdown shop and to the Sanctum Showdown experience. But I do think that there is something to be said for the fact that at least this isn't another Kid Omega. This is a card that everyone should be able to get. It should not be that difficult, and the bugs that exist in the game mode are only helping people get it. Now, as far as actually getting the game mode stuff, as far as actually getting more than that, you might need to play an elite optimized deck. And that means that it's time to talk about the Guardians of the game mode. A lot of people have complained that the Guardians of the Galaxy are flat out overpowered in the Sanctum Showdown game mode. Remember that Sanctum Showdown is about fighting for one location at a time. So cards that are best when you know your opponent is going to contest a location are cards that are better in this game mode. But to me, Guardians of the Galaxy aren't even the main story of what this game mode is about. It's not just cards that are elite on rate, which, to be clear, all of the Guardians of the Galaxy are still very good metagame defining cards, but the one that really stands out to me is Werewolf by Night. Werewolf by Night not only synergizes with the Guardians package, he juices it to unbelievable levels. Remember, if your main focus is winning 1 out of the 3 locations, having all of your power at that location is kind of what you want to do. You also want to do that without guaranteeing that you've overinvested into that location. Werewolf by Night being effectively movable giant power makes it, to me, the defining card of this game mode. I know many people will argue that the Guardians in total are perhaps more influential, but I think Werewolf by Night takes the crown. With that in mind, this is kind of the default deck that you can expect a plugged-in player to be playing in Sanctum Showdown. It's not necessarily going to have 12 out of 12 of the card choices everyone is going to make, but it's a pretty good representation of what the good stuff deck looks like in a Sanctum Showdown game mode. Now, what this deck is doing is sort of leaning more into traditional good stuff that manages to have power, but not overly commit to winning one location all of the time. You'll see more all-in versions of this, with things like Stegron, for example, replacing Galacta and Gwenpool. To my mind, though, what Galacta and Gwenpool do well is that they manage to put power on a location and also commit power to other locations. That is sort of the essence of the game mode, such that you're not hyper-invested in only winning that one location. You're going to be able to win other locations, pick up those small wins as it comes, and you're going to be better equipped to pivot and win big when you actually need it. That's the theory behind this deck. Of course, it's also playing many of the cards we've already talked about. The backbone of this deck still is Guardians and Werewolf and Shang-Chi in order to deal with your opponent's Guardians and Werewolves, and that is going to be a viable way to approach this game mode as long as it exists. I've been seeing people arguing that they should ban the Guardians from this game mode. I think that's probably a bit short-sighted. They are very good cards, but this is kind of the only time where they're going to be very good. I think it's probably good that a limited time game mode does allow them to actually have these cards succeed in some way. This is a set of cards that basically is not playable anywhere else. I think it would be a mistake to take the cards everyone has out of the game mode where they're actually good for the first time since people were collection level 50. One of the other dominant decks in Sanctum Showdown so far has been Surtur, or more specifically, just 10s. You're really just interested in playing 10s. We've talked about how the game mode is built around winning one individual location, and it's cool that they have a Drax that can get as big as this kind of stuff, except it just has to actually work. So what the 10s deck is doing is saying, like, look, your Guardians are cute. I like that you're doing what you're doing. That's cool that your 5-drop is 10. My 5-drop is bigger. I have all of this stuff. I'm going to play more stats than you, and I'm going to impact the board in the same way the Guardians do, which is to say, very large men. But if I've played a Sauron, my guys are just bigger than yours. And I have access to a top end of Scar, which is absolutely devastating on those really crucial final turns of the game, where it could go either way, and you're going to be able to just absolutely crush people with that. I think this deck is legitimately very underrated. A lot of people, I feel like, are talking about Werewolf, are talking about Guardians, and we started this video talking about both of those things. These guys are good. Slap 10s on people, they're bigger than the Guardians at the same rate, and you get a free Scar. When you get a Sauron early with this deck, it legitimately feels like cheating. Now, there are a couple of different early packages you can be running. I've seen people lean into the Sauron thing even further and say, I'm also playing Ebony Maw, which is just a devastating card to have access to if you are able to Sauron or zero it. The problem is, when you don't have Sauron, that Ebony Maw is actually really terrible. So it's kind of a sort of trade-off that you have to be willing to try to make. I do think that generally speaking, though, having access to a 1/7, having access to a 1/12, that's the kind of stuff that's going to win you later rounds of Sanctum very powerfully. This deck also doesn't have nearly so many on-reveals. One of the ways that people have been attempting to counter the Guardians decks and the Werewolf decks is by just like slamming a Gorr down on that thing to sort of mimic the same late game thing where it's just like, oh, okay, we're both trading locations, we're doing okay. I've been picking up the small ones, you've been picking up the big ones. Here's a Gorr, you never beat that lane, it's just bigger than everything you have. And I do think that this deck has a meaningful advantage into that kind of stuff. Zoo is just cool. I think one of the things that I like about what Zoo does as opposed to what a lot of these decks are doing is that the baseline strategy for Sanctum is, oh, we're only going to fight over one lane, right? Like, we're fighting over one lane. That's the one where the cool stuff is. Zoo is probably the best deck in the entire format at fighting for 3 lanes because of its natural deployment to 3 lanes. It's just a very powerful thing to do, and because you have, of course, a Mockingbird, you have very big guys, you have this ability to, like, spread your power across all 3 lanes, pick up the small ones, and while you're not necessarily going to beat the best draws out of the 1-lane only decks, you are very competitive with them, and if you can pick up a lead early, you can win those side lanes into winning the entire game, or you can be aggressive with your snaps to make sure that your Mockingbird or your Gilgamesh is going to do what it needs to do. Keep in mind, you're not necessarily the greatest against a Werewolf snowball, so if you can pick up points before that starts happening, that can be really valuable, and of course then rely on a giant Gilgamesh in order to sort of end the game when you really need it to end. And I think that's kind of how you want to approach playing a deck like this. Gilgamesh and Mockingbird are your surprise, I'm actually contesting the location kind of things, and the rest of the time you're playing reasonable points onto the location and also contesting the other 2 locations, and that's just a fine thing to do. This is a good deck. I consider it sort of the baseline here, where it's like, if you can't beat Zoo, you can't be a deck in this format. This is the deck that says, like, I'm not even trying my hardest to win the locations that the Sanctum is at. I'm just picking up all the other stuff. If you can't beat me on the Sanctum, you're unplayable. One of the cool things about Werewolf by Night and a couple of these other cards is that they activate Miles Morales. Miles Morales at 1/6. We talked about the power of a 1/12. We talked about the power of a 1/7. It's time to talk about the power of a 1/6. It's very, very good in this game mode. This is a sort of wolf/afflict/move/good cards Guardians style deck. Laufey, notably a very powerful Guardians of the Galaxy type card that I think should probably probably be in a little more decks than he already is in, just because of how powerful he is against those filled up lanes that you can occasionally see in this game mode. He ends up being one of the biggest and meanest 4-cost cards that you can possibly play. There's also a Spider Woman in here. Again, that's really just budget Laufey. Like, it's the same thing, but a little bit, like, bigger body, a little bit worse effect, a lot worse effect, really. Again, though, it's just trying to replicate the Gamora, right? Like, Gamora and Spider Woman kind of doing the same thing a lot of the time. That's really all that's happening here. You obviously have your Werewolf package, you have your Hydra Bob, you have your other Guardians. Just very much a good stuff deck, taking a bit of a different line in order to be a little bit heavier into the other good stuff decks. One thing that you may have noticed is that there are a lot of targets for Shadow King in this game mode, and so I'm not necessarily sure that bounce is necessarily always the best way to do what you're trying to do with Shadow King, but you can get a lot of really powerful stuff to happen and then redistribute that really powerful stuff elsewhere. Now, notably, that often requires taking a turn off, which is not something that you necessarily want to do. But I do think it's worth putting a highlight not just on this strategy in this game mode, which it is definitely playable, but also on specifically the card Shadow King, who is a dominant piece of this game mode, in my humble opinion. We've talked a lot about Werewolf, we've talked a lot about Guardians, we've talked a lot about all of this stuff that gets green power. Shadow King can be the kind of thing where if you're behind and they're counting on some Guardians and Werewolves, you can absolutely blow them out. It is that good. Something I really enjoyed about the previous iteration of Sanctum was that just normal Afflict was totally playable in there. And a lot of that was on the power of the 4-drops, right? Man-Thing is obviously astonishingly powerful in a game mode like this. Laufey is obviously astonishingly powerful in a game mode like this. Many other decks are basing their strategies on getting a big discounted guy, like a big discounted Mockingbird or a Miles Morales or a Scar, and we have Abomination to try to match that. This is a deck that sort of keys off of those cards. If you are able to get them down and start really doing damage, it is extremely, extremely powerful. There are a couple things that stand out. I kind of want to get a Surge in here. I kind of want to get a Zabu in here. Again, a lot of that is just I care deeply about that stuff. I do think a lot of the power of this deck is down to those 2 4s, and I almost sort of wonder if it's maybe an overcommit to be all in on this, when what we could be doing is doing like 3 4s, high Evo, those being like high Evo, Man-Thing and Laufey, and then we have, of course, the Abomination to go along with that. I kind of wonder if, like, what the correct thing to do is just splice that into some other decks, but I certainly haven't got around to it, and I do think that it's definitely worth pointing out that this kind of stuff is really good in a game mode that is so tempo-focused and so full of relatively smaller bodies with relatively smaller energy costs. Last up, we have another tempo list, but this one is looking to be the tempo list that beats the other tempo lists. You're both doing Guardians Wolf stuff, but you have a Gorr, which gives you a trump card in every Guardians Wolf matchup when it comes down to just winning that last Sanctum location. It is a legitimately powerful thing to do when Gorr is going to be basically 6 infinity. You just have to make sure the game actually gets to the point where you can play Gorr and it'll actually matter. That is kind of awkward sometimes. There are a lot of very powerful snowballs in this format, but I do think that on the whole, there is something to be said for being this deck, but it beats the other versions of this deck. Second Dinner made a couple of very welcome changes to the Sanctum format. The first, and I think the most important, and this is really like what I really wanted to talk about, is they made it so you get 16 charms if your opponent retreats. That's really, really good, because previously retreats would deny charms. I think that's actually a little bit above and beyond. My instinct was what they should do is give you the charms for the round that they retreated. They were just like, no, you win, you get a full 16. That's really good. It's just a really good change to this format that really removed some of the awkward and bad things out of the format that were terrible last time. I think that that has done a lot towards making the sort of general experience of this game mode playable, right? Like, this is now something you don't feel bad about winning too hard early. Your opponent retreats, you get your 16, it's totally fine. You love that. There is something else, though, and there is this weird bug that we haven't been able to replicate. Like, I'm not saying it doesn't happen a bunch. It does happen a bunch. I haven't been able to figure out the conditions for replicating it, and I really wish I had, because otherwise I'd be telling you how to do it right now, because what this bug does is make your reward charms count on the track. So you know how when you level up, you get charms, like you get like 100 charms for the first level, 200 for the second level, 300 for the third level? Those aren't supposed to count on the track. They aren't supposed to like propel you upwards to more levels. Sometimes, for reasons we haven't been able to figure out, they do. They do that. And if that happens to you, it's great. It's like basically just free level ups. You're getting much, much closer to the card for free, for spending no time at all. This is interesting to me, though, because this is the exact bug that happened with their Twitch drops last time, which was Twitch drops were not supposed to count towards your, like, reward on the track, and they did. And you'd think they'd have fixed that, but actually maybe they didn't, and there's no Twitch drops, so we won't ever know. But last time this wasn't happening. Like, last time it was just Twitch drops that were doing this. Now sometimes even the rewards you get on the track are doing this. I don't know. I think that there was a team answer where Glenn called out this mode specifically as, we want it to be shooting the middle between the no sweatness of high voltage, not overdrive obviously, and the high sweat of Deadpool's Diner. And I gotta tell you, because of these bugs, I feel like it's been shooting lower than the middle. Like, if they're aiming for a 5 on the sweatometer, this is like a 3. And I think it might have been a 3 even without the bugs. Maybe it's a 2 with the bugs. But they're not shooting high on the sweatometer here. And I think, frankly, that's mostly what people want. People don't want to, like, sit here and, like, realize that the Kid Omega thing is happening again. They want an easy game mode, and it's probably a good idea to give that to them. Just, I don't understand, you know, what's going on with their reward track and distribution of charms such that this bug would happen twice in different ways in 2 different implementations of Sanctum Showdown. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal. Enjoy earning, or getting, I suppose, your free, presumably, astral projection. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.